The distress signal came through at 0300 hours, faint, fragmented, and coming from coordinates that hadn't been active in over 20 years. Chief Petty Officer Dasha Rivera studied the encrypted message, a single word repeating, "Survivor." Command sent her alone with Ghost, her SEAL dog, to an abandoned airbase the Navy claimed was destroyed by fire. What they found inside defied explanation. Fresh footprints disappearing through solid walls, a prototype that never officially existed, and a radio voice that knew Rivera's name. When the hangar vanished from satellite imagery hours later, Rivera realized the truth was far worse than any cover-up. The military doesn't just hide secrets, some secrets hide themselves. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoy stories that blur the line between military thriller and the impossible, subscribe for new tales every week. Chief Petty Officer Dasha Rivera sat alone in the darkened communications room at Naval Base San Diego, her fingers moving methodically across the console. The graveyard shift suited her these days. No questions about the bandage on her temple. No sidelong glances when she paused mid-sentence, searching for words that should come easily. No awkward attempts at conversation from junior officers who had heard rumors about what happened during Cobalt Dusk. The room hummed with electronic static and the soft beeping of automated signal checks. Officially, she was monitoring shipping communications along the Pacific coastline. Unofficially, she was being warehoused until her superiors decided what to do with her. Ghost shifted at her feet, his silver-gray fur barely visible in the darkness. The Belgian Malinois was technically a military working dog, but he followed only Rivera's commands. Another irregularity that command overlooked. Another reminder of an operation no one wanted to discuss. The dog's ears perked suddenly, his head lifting toward the main communications array. Rivera glanced at him, then at the console. Nothing unusual registered on any of the active channels. "What is it, boy?" she whispered, running a hand across his head. Ghost stood, muscles tense, eyes fixed on the console. Rivera had learned to trust the dog's instincts. She began cycling through dormant frequencies, running a broader spectrum analysis than the standard monitoring protocols required. At precisely 300 hours, a signal broke through on a frequency that hadn't been used by the military in decades. It was weak, fragmented, the encryption pattern outdated by at least 20 years. Ghost growled softly, pressing against her leg. Rivera isolated the signal, her fingers moving quickly to capture and enhance the transmission. Fragments of coordinates embedded in the code, and one word, repeated at regular intervals: "Survivor." The coordinates made no sense. They pointed to Alameda Naval Air Station, a base decommissioned after a fire in 2004. She had processed paperwork related to Alameda during her first posting. The facility had been stripped of all sensitive equipment, sealed, and eventually sold to civilian developers who had yet to break ground. Yet the signal was undeniably military-grade, using an encryption protocol that would be nearly impossible for civilians to replicate. Rivera ran the authentication sequence 3 times to be certain. The transmission was genuine. More concerning was the timestamp embedded in the signal's metadata. According to the system, the message had been initiated less than 30 minutes ago. She reached for the phone to alert Commander Lockhart, then hesitated. The pattern in the encryption sequence was distinctive, with irregular spacing between character blocks that looked familiar. She had seen this pattern before, during the operation designated Cobalt Dusk, the operation that had left her with headaches, memory gaps, and a medical file thick with psychological evaluations. Ghost whined softly, looking from Rivera to the door. She needed to report this through proper channels, but instinct told her to proceed carefully. She documented the signal, saved the recording to her secure personal drive, and dialed Commander Lockhart's emergency line. 15 minutes later, Lockhart strode into the communications room, uniform impeccable despite the hour. His weathered face revealed nothing as Rivera played the recording and explained the authentication results. "Equipment malfunction," he said immediately, not even bothering to examine her findings. "That base has been inactive for 20 years, Chief. With respect, sir, this signal has a current timestamp and uses encryption protocols that match classified patterns." She pulled up the analysis. The coordinates are specific to Hangar 4, which appears in no public record of the facility. Lockhart's expression hardened. "You accessed classified archives?" Only what's available to my clearance level, sir. She hadn't mentioned that she'd recognized the encryption pattern from the Cobalt Dusk. That operation was still classified beyond her access level, despite her involvement. Chief Rivera, you're recovering from a traumatic incident. Working these overnight shifts probably isn't helping your sleep patterns or your cognitive processing. The condescension in his tone was carefully measured, not enough to justify a complaint, just enough to remind her of her precarious position. 6 months of exemplary service before Cobalt Dusk, now treated like an unstable liability. The signal is real, Commander. Someone is broadcasting from a location that's supposed to be abandoned using military encryption that shouldn't be accessible to civilians. I'll have technical run a diagnostic on the equipment tomorrow. He reached over and switched off her monitor. Your shift is over, Chief. Go home. Get some rest. That's an order. Rivera stood, military discipline overriding frustration. Yes, sir. Ghost followed her silently as they left. The communications center. The night air was cool against her face as they walked to her car, the parking lot nearly empty. The base never truly slept, but at this hour, only essential personnel remained active. Instead of driving home, she sat in her car and pulled out her personal tablet. If Lockhart wouldn't investigate, she would run her own analysis. The bandwidth restrictions on personal devices would slow her down, but she could at least verify the coordinates. Alameda Naval Air Station had once been a significant installation, home to several aircraft squadrons and special operations units. The official record stated that a fire in 2004 had damaged critical infrastructure, accelerating planned decommissioning. The facility was stripped, sealed, and eventually transferred to civilian control for redevelopment. Yet, as Rivera dug deeper into public records, inconsistencies emerged. Environmental impact studies that should have preceded any transfer of military property were incomplete. Redevelopment plans had been approved, then indefinitely delayed due to unspecified contamination concerns. Satellite imagery of the location was consistently obscured by cloud cover or distortion, regardless of weather conditions reported in the area. Most puzzling was the complete absence of any reference to Hangar 4 in the publicly available base schematics. Hangars 1 through 3 and 5 through 8 were clearly marked, but 4 simply didn't exist in any official capacity. Ghost rested his head on her lap as she worked, occasionally looking up at her with intelligent eyes that seemed to understand far more than a dog should. She'd found him during Cobalt Dusk, the only survivor in a laboratory complex that officially never existed. His military service record listed him as a standard tactical support canine, but Rivera had seen the markings on his tags before they were replaced with standard identifiers. Ghost had been part of something called Project Sentinel, whatever that was. Dawn was breaking when Rivera finally drove home to her small apartment just off base. She should sleep, but her mind was racing with questions about the signal. Instead, she secured her tablet and personal drive in the hidden safe behind her bookshelf, then showered and changed into civilian clothes. The Naval Intelligence Office opened at 0800. Her current clearance level would allow her to access certain historical records without raising immediate flags. If she was careful, she might find some reference to Hangar 4 or whatever project had been housed there. The intelligence officer on duty barely glanced at her credentials, the morning rush of personnel providing cover for her presence. She located a terminal in the corner of the research room and began searching for references to Alameda. Most files required higher clearance than she possessed, but she could access inventory manifests and personnel transfer records from the decommissioning period. Nothing specifically mentioned Hangar 4, but she noticed a pattern in the transfer orders. Several communication specialists and research scientists had been reassigned to a facility called Project Threshold immediately before the reported fire. When she attempted to query Project Threshold, her terminal locked, displaying a security warning. Moments later, her access badge deactivated with an audible beep. System maintenance, the intelligence officer called from his desk, not bothering to look up. Try again tomorrow? Rivera nodded and exited calmly, knowing it was no coincidence. Something about her search had triggered security protocols. By the time she reached her car, her phone buzzed with a message from Lockhart. Report to my office, 1,000 hours. She drove home first, retrieving her tablet and personal drive. If her security clearance was being revoked, she needed to preserve whatever information she'd already gathered. She transferred the files to an encrypted drive small enough to wear on a chain around her neck. Ghost was waiting at the apartment door when she returned, his posture alert. Rivera knelt beside him, running her hands through his fur, checking for any sign that someone had interfered with him during her absence. The dog was more than a companion. He was the only tangible connection to Cobalt Dusk she had left. "We're okay, boy," she murmured, though she wasn't certain it was true. The drive back to base gave her time to prepare for the meeting with Lockhart. He would question her unauthorized research, perhaps cite her recent medical history as reason for concern. She needed to appear appropriately contrite while gathering whatever information she could about the signal and Alameda. Lockhart's office was meticulously organized, walls adorned with commendations and photographs of his long naval career. He gestured for her to sit, his expression unreadable. "You accessed classified archives this morning, Chief Rivera?" "Yes, sir. I was concerned about the signal and wanted to verify the coordinates. After I specifically told you it was an equipment malfunction. It wasn't a question. With respect, sir, I've worked communications long enough to recognize a genuine transmission. The encryption was military grade, the timestamp current." Lockhart sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Your psychological evaluation following Cobalt Dusk indicated potential issues with distinguishing between actual events and stress-induced perceptions. Your doctors recommended extended leave, but you insisted on returning to duty. My performance has been exemplary since returning, sir." She kept her voice steady. "The signal was real. What do you know about Alameda Naval Air Station, Chief?" The abrupt change in direction caught her off guard. "Standard knowledge, sir. Commissioned in 1936, served as a major naval air facility until decommissioning in 2004 following fire damage. Currently owned by civilian developers but unoccupied due to environmental concerns. And what do you know about Hangar 4? Rivera hesitated, choosing her words carefully. The coordinates in the signal indicated a structure designated Hangar 4, but I could find no record of this facility in available documents. Lockhart opened a folder on his desk, removing a single sheet of paper. Your service record includes a commendation for actions during Operation Waypoint in 2022. Do you recall the details of that operation? Another sudden shift. Rivera felt a flicker of unease. Yes, sir. My team provided communication support for a hostage extraction in Southeast Asia. Who was your commanding officer during that operation? Commander Thaddeus Lockhart, sir. And where was the operation staged from? Naval Support Activity Singapore, sir. Lockhart slid the paper across the desk. It was her service record, but the details were wrong. Operation Waypoint was listed as occurring in 2021, not 2022. The staging location was listed as Naval Base Guam. That's incorrect, sir, she said, pointing to the discrepancies. Is it? Lockhart's expression remained neutral. Your memory has been compromised since Cobalt Dusk, Chief. Parts of your service record have been redacted for security purposes, but what remains is accurate. The implication was clear. Her recollections couldn't be trusted. The frustration must have shown on her face because Lockhart's expression softened slightly. I understand your concern about the signal, but I've already dispatched a team to verify the coordinates. They found nothing but an abandoned airfield, no active transmissions, no signs of recent activity. He closed the folder. Some signals aren't meant to be answered, Chief. The phrasing seemed odd. Not that the signal wasn't real, but that it shouldn't be answered. Is there something about Alameda I should know, sir? The base is decommissioned, Rivera. Whatever you think you detected was either equipment malfunction or signal interference from civilian sources. Lockhart stood, indicating the meeting was over. Take the rest of the day off. Report back for your regular shift tomorrow. Rivera left the office with more questions than answers. If Lockhart had sent a team to investigate, he clearly took the signal seriously despite his dismissal, and the reference to her service record was troubling. She remembered Operation Waypoint clearly, could recall specific conversations with Lockhart during the planning phase. Rather than leaving base, she made her way to the medical facilities. Her physician, Dr. Kamdar, had been treating her since her return from Cobalt Dusk. Unlike Lockhart, Kamdar had always listened to her concerns without immediate dismissal. The doctor was finishing with another patient when Rivera arrived, but waved her into the office with a warm smile. Chief Rivera, no appointment today? Just needed to ask a quick question, doctor, about my memory issues. Kamdar gestured for her to sit. What's troubling you? Could my condition cause? Me to misremember specific details of past operations, dates, locations, that sort of thing? The doctor considered the question carefully. The trauma you experienced affected your short-term memory formation around the time of the incident. Some memory gaps from that period are expected, but it shouldn't affect established memories from before cobalt dusk. What about the headaches and déjà vu episodes? Side effects of the concussion, most likely. The brain needs time to re-establish normal patterns after trauma. Kamdar studied her face. Has something specific happened? Rivera explained about the service record discrepancies, careful to avoid mentioning the signal or her research into Alameda. Memory is complex, Kamdar said after listening. Sometimes what we think we remember clearly is influenced by subsequent experiences. But significant details like mission dates and locations are usually reliable, especially for someone with your training. Rivera nodded, thanking the doctor for her time. As she turned to leave, Kamdar called after her. Chief Rivera, when was the last time you had a full neurological workup? 6 weeks ago, during my last evaluation. I'd like to schedule another, just to be thorough. Rivera agreed and left, the sense of unease growing. Outside, she checked her phone and found an alert from base security. Her clearance level had been downgraded, restricting her access to several areas where she normally worked. It was happening too quickly, a coordinated effort to isolate and discredit her. Someone wanted the signal buried, along with whatever secrets Alameda held. Ghost was waiting in her car, though she was certain she'd left him at her apartment. The dog had an uncanny ability to find her wherever she went on base. She scratched behind his ears, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "We need help, boy," she murmured. Her former teammate, Zephyr Reyes, had transferred to Naval Intelligence 6 months earlier. They had served together on multiple operations before Cobalt Dusk, including Waypoint. If anyone could help her access information about Alameda without triggering more security alerts, it would be him. Reyes agreed to meet at a coffee shop off base during his lunch break. He arrived in civilian clothes, expression guarded as he slid into the booth across from her. "You're stirring up trouble, Rivera," he said without preamble. "Half of intelligence is scrambling to track your database queries from this morning." "I need to know about Alameda Naval Air Station," she replied quietly. "Specifically Hangar 4. Reyes's face remained carefully neutral, but she caught the brief flicker in his eyes. Recognition. "There is no Hangar 4 at Alameda." The signal came from somewhere, Reyes. Military encryption, current timestamp, from a facility that's supposed to be abandoned. What signal? She explained about the transmission, the coordinates, the repeated word, survivor. Throughout her explanation, Reyes remained stone-faced, offering no reaction. "You think I'm compromised," she said finally, "like Lockhart." "I think you experienced significant trauma during Cobalt Dusk," Reyes said carefully. "Your medical file includes references to possible hallucinations and false memory formation." "You've seen my medical file?" Reyes didn't answer directly. "Your clearance was downgraded this morning because you're asking questions about a facility that doesn't exist. That raises flags, Rivera." "Then why are intelligence officers scrambling to contain my queries? If there's nothing to hide, why the response?" Reyes leaned forward, voice dropping. "Whatever you think you found, drop it, for your own sake." He glanced around, then continued. "There are surveillance drones monitoring your apartment. Your communications are being screened. Asking about Alameda has triggered alerts I've never seen before." The confirmation that she was under surveillance should have been shocking, but Rivera felt only grim validation. She wasn't imagining things. "I need access to information about Project Threshold," she pressed. "It was connected to Alameda before the decommissioning." Reyes stood abruptly. "I can't help you, Rivera. I'm sorry." He turned to leave, then paused, speaking without looking back. "If I were investigating something sensitive, I'd check the personnel transfers from 2004. Scientists don't just disappear, even from black projects." He walked away, leaving Rivera with one small thread to pull. She paid for her coffee and returned to her car, where Ghost waited patiently. The dog tilted his head, studying her face as if assessing her emotional state. "We're on our own now, boy," she told him, starting the engine. Back at her apartment, Rivera checked for surveillance devices, finding nothing obvious. She assumed her electronic communications were being monitored, which limited her options for research. Using her secured tablet, she began searching public records for the scientists and communications specialists transferred from Alameda before the fire. Most had unremarkable career trajectories after Alameda, transferring to various naval facilities before eventually retiring or moving to civilian positions. But three names stood out: Dr. Astrid Novak, Dr. Elias Bannerman, and Dr. J.A. Chen. All three had been research leaders at Alameda, all were transferred to Project Threshold 2 weeks before the fire, and all three died within 5 years of the transfer in separate accidents. Dr. Novak's file included a photograph that triggered a flash of recognition. Rivera had seen her before, though she couldn't place where. The scientist had specialized in quantum communications, developing systems that could theoretically maintain signal integrity across extreme distances or through heavy interference. As Rivera continued her research, Ghost suddenly stood, growling softly at the apartment door. Seconds later, her phone chimed with a message from an unknown, a number. "Check your mail." She approached the door cautiously, opening it to find the hallway empty. A white envelope had been slipped under the door while she worked. Inside was a handwritten note in precise, flowing script. "They're listening for you too." The handwriting was hauntingly familiar. Rivera returned to her tablet, pulling up Dr. Novak's personnel file again. Included was a scan of a handwritten research log. The writing matched the note perfectly. Rivera's hands trembled slightly as she turned the paper over. On the back was a second message. "This is your 8th attempt, Dasha. Remember the wall." 8th attempt. The words echoed in her mind, triggering a cascade of fragmented images. A wall that wasn't solid. Footprints disappearing into metal. Ghost growling at empty air. She sat heavily on the couch, Ghost pressing against her legs as if sensing her distress. The note could only mean one thing. Dr. Astrid Novak, officially dead for 3 years, had somehow delivered a message to her apartment while evading surveillance. Rivera needed to leave immediately. Whatever was happening at Alameda, whatever connection it had to her past, she would find no answers here. She was being watched, her access restricted, her credibility undermined. She packed quickly and efficiently, years of deployment experience guiding her choices. Essential clothing, basic survival gear, her service weapon, and the encrypted drive containing her research. Ghost watched attentively, understanding that something significant was happening. As night fell, Rivera contacted a former SEAL teammate who now worked in the private sector, arranging for transportation documents that would withstand cursory inspection. By midnight, she and Ghost were on the road, heading north toward Alameda Naval Air Station. The decision to go AWOL was not made lightly. She was risking her career, possibly her freedom. But the signal was real, the surveillance was real, and somewhere in Alameda, someone was broadcasting a single word that resonated through her fragmented memories. Survivor. Have you ever felt drawn to a mystery so powerful it made you question everything you believed about yourself? Let me know in the comments below, and subscribe for part 2, where Chief Rivera discovers what truly waits inside Hangar 4. The dust storm hit without warning as Rivera approached Alameda Naval Air Station. Visibility dropped to mere feet, forcing her to navigate by the GPS coordinates she had extracted from the signal. Ghost pressed his nose to the window, alert despite the howling winds that buffeted the vehicle. The storm felt almost deliberately timed, as if the abandoned base didn't want to be found. She parked a quarter mile from the main entrance, concealing her vehicle behind a dilapidated maintenance shed. The official perimeter was marked with faded biohazard warnings and no trespassing signs, chain link fencing sagging from years of neglect. Yet, the padlock on the gate looked new, its metal gleaming despite the swirling dust. Rivera adjusted her tactical vest and secured her pack. The weight of her service weapon against her hip provided small comfort as she cut through the fence at a less visible section. Ghost slipped through first, his silver-gray coat quickly becoming tan with dust as he waited for her to follow. "Find," she commanded softly, showing him the signal pattern she had printed. The dog had been trained to track electronic emissions, another skill not listed in his official records. Ghost led her past the main administrative buildings, their windows shattered, walls covered in graffiti. The base appeared exactly as one would expect an abandoned military facility to look: decaying, vandalized, reclaimed by nature. But as they moved deeper into the complex, inconsistencies emerged. Fresh tire tracks cut through the dust, leading toward the distant hangars. Security cameras, partially concealed by overgrowth but undeniably modern, tracked their movement. And strangest of all, Rivera experienced momentary double vision, brief flashes where the decaying structures around her appeared intact, lights glowing from within before fading back to darkness. Ghost stopped suddenly, hackles rising as he stared at an empty stretch of tarmac. Rivera followed his gaze but saw nothing. The dog growled, a low, continuous sound that she had heard only once before, during cobalt dusk, when they had encountered something Ghost perceived as threatening, but remained invisible to human eyes. "What is it, boy?" she whispered, kneeling beside him. Ghost's ears twitched, tracking something moving across the tarmac. Rivera felt a cold sensation pass through her, like walking through an invisible curtain of ice water. Her watch malfunctioned briefly, digital numbers flickering before resetting to show a time 3 minutes earlier than it had displayed moments before. The hangars loomed ahead, massive structures silhouetted against the dust-filled sky. Hangars 1, 2, and 3 stood in a row, their numbers still visible on their weathered doors. Beyond them, where Hangar 4 should have been, was what appeared to be a partially collapsed structure, its roof caved in, walls crumbling from apparent fire damage. Yet the signal was definitely coming from that location. Ghost pulled toward it with increasing urgency, his training warring with obvious apprehension. As they approached, Rivera noticed another inconsistency. The collapse looked dramatic from a distance, but up close, the damage appeared almost artificial, like a movie set designed to discourage closer inspection. The rubble around the perimeter was minimal compared to what a genuine structural failure would produce. She circled the hangar, looking for an entry point. The main doors were sealed with heavy chains and concrete barriers, but a service entrance on the far side stood partially open, its frame warped as if from intense heat. Ghost hesitated at the threshold, whining, softly. "It's okay," Rivera assured him, though she felt the same inexplicable dread. She activated her flashlight and stepped inside. The interior defied the external appearance. While the collapsed roof was visible from outside, inside the hangar was intact, cavernous, dark, but structurally sound. Her flashlight beam caught the gleam of polished concrete floors, not the debris-strewn ground she had expected. The air smelled of ozone and jet fuel, not dust and decay. The signal beacon sat in the center of the hangar floor, a modern military-grade device that looked like it had been placed there recently. Its display showed active transmission, timestamp confirming the signal was currently broadcasting. Ghost approached it cautiously, sniffing before looking up at Rivera with confused eyes. Beyond the beacon was what first appeared to be an aircraft fuselage under a tarp. Rivera approached slowly, weapon ready, and pulled back the covering. It wasn't an aircraft, at least not a conventional one. The vehicle beneath was smaller than a standard drone, its body a matte black that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. No markings, no serial numbers, nothing to indicate its origin except the distinctive neural interface controls visible in the open cockpit section. Rivera had seen similar technology during specialized operations training, but those systems had been experimental, years away from deployment. This looked fully operational, yet somehow older, as if from an alternate development timeline. A soft click echoed through the hangar. Ghost barked once, loud, sharp, as overhead lights activated in sequence, revealing the true scale of the facility. The hangar wasn't just intact, it was maintained. Clean workstations lined the walls, diagnostic equipment hummed with standby power, and digital displays flickered with data streams. "Impossible," Rivera whispered, turning slowly to take in the transformed space. That's when she noticed the footprints. Fresh boot tracks led from the drone toward the far wall of the hangar, standard military issue, approximately her size. She followed them with her flashlight, tracing their path until they stopped abruptly. Not near the wall, in it. The footprints vanished halfway through what appeared to be solid metal. Rivera approached cautiously, Ghost following reluctantly. The wall looked normal, riveted steel panels typical of military construction. She reached out, expecting to touch cold metal. Her hand passed through. Not completely, there was resistance, like pushing through heavy gel. But for a brief moment, her fingers disappeared into what should have been solid matter. She yanked her hand back, heart pounding. Ghost growled at the wall, backing away. Her radio crackled to life, emitting bursts of static interspersed with fragments of voices. She adjusted the frequency, trying to clarify the transmission. Dimensional stability at 63%, a clinical voice stated. Subject, approaching threshold point. You shouldn't have come here, Chief. This voice was clearer, directed specifically at her. The radio died, its power draining instantly. The overhead lights flickered and went dark, plunging the hangar back into shadow, broken only by her flashlight beam. Ghost pressed against her leg, trembling but alert, staring at the wall that now appeared completely solid. We need to leave, Rivera said, her tactical training overriding curiosity. They retreated toward the exit, Ghost leading the way. Outside, the dust storm had intensified, visibility reduced to almost nothing. Rivera oriented herself using her compass, which spun wildly before settling on a direction she was certain wasn't north. The sound of helicopter rotors cut through the howling wind. Searchlights pierced the dust cloud, sweeping the area around the hangar complex. Someone had discovered her presence, possibly through the same surveillance systems that had been monitoring her apartment. Rivera and Ghost took cover in a drainage culvert as the helicopters passed overhead. The aircraft were unmarked, their configuration military, but not matching standard Navy or Marine deployments. Whoever was searching for her wasn't operating through normal channels. When the immediate threat passed, Rivera consulted her map. The base schematics she had studied showed an underground maintenance network connecting the hangars to the main administrative complex. If those tunnels were still accessible, they might provide both cover and alternative routes through the facility. The nearest access point should have been behind Hangar 3. They moved carefully through the storm, using the limited visibility as cover. The maintenance hatch was partially buried under windblown sand, but intact. Rivera cleared the debris and found the hatch locked with the same type of new padlock she had noticed at the gate. She made short work of it with her tactical tools, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. Ghost went first, surprisingly eager to leave the surface behind. Rivera followed, securing the hatch above them. The maintenance tunnel was in better condition than expected, emergency lighting still functional along the ceiling. The air was stale but breathable, the concrete walls marked with faded directional indicators and warning signs. They moved quickly, following signs for the central hub where multiple tunnel systems converged. As they progressed deeper, Rivera experienced more frequent episodes of double vision, moments where the tunnel appeared newly constructed. Workers in lab coats passing through intersections before fading from view. Ghost reacted to these phantoms, his head tracking their movement, confirming they weren't simply hallucinations. The central hub opened into a larger chamber filled with outdated computer equipment and monitoring stations. Maps on the wall showed the complete underground network, including connections to structures that didn't appear in any official record of the base. One path led to something labeled Project Threshold, Primary Laboratory. Ghost's ears perked up at a sound Rivera couldn't hear. The dog moved toward a heavy blast door at the far end of the hub, sealed with both mechanical and electronic locks. Unlike the padlock at the entrance, this security system was far beyond her ability to bypass with the tools she carried. The door featured a biometric scanner beside the conventional locks. Out of desperation rather than hope, Rivera placed her palm against it. The scanner illuminated, a red light passing beneath her hand. A mechanical click followed, the blast door's locking mechanisms disengaging one by one. Identity confirmed, Rivera, D Project Threshold clearance reinstated. The automated voice echoed in the chamber as the massive door swung inward, revealing a fully operational laboratory beyond. Equipment hummed, displays showed active data processing, and in the center, surrounded by a semicircle of monitoring stations, stood Dr. Astrid Novak. The scientist looked far older than her personnel photo, her once dark hair now completely white, face lined with deep wrinkles. But her eyes were sharp, alert, and completely unsurprised by Rivera's arrival. "You're getting faster each time, Dasha," Novak said, her voice matching the handwritten note precisely. "But they're already collapsing the timeline. Look." She gestured to a bank of monitors displaying multiple overlapping images of the hangar above. Each showed the same space from slightly different angles, with subtle variations in equipment placement. And in each one, a different version of Rivera was performing slightly different actions, checking the drone, examining the wall, speaking into her radio. "You're not just receiving the signal," Novak explained, watching Rivera's stunned expression. "You are the signal." Ghost approached Novak without hesitation, allowing the scientist to stroke his head with familiar affection. "He remembers, even when you can't," she said. "That's why they paired you together. Ghost exists partially outside conventional dimensional constraints." Rivera struggled to process what she was seeing. "What is this place? What's happening to me?" "This is Project Threshold," Novak replied, leading her deeper into the laboratory. 20 years ago, we discovered a method to establish communications across parallel dimensions, realities that exist alongside our own, separated by quantum barriers. The central area of the lab held a circular platform surrounded by equipment that looked both advanced and improvised, as if constructed from whatever components had been available. "The experiment succeeded beyond our expectations," Novak continued. "We didn't just establish communication, we created a tear in dimensional barriers. The fire reported at Alameda was our containment system, failing spectacularly." She brought up historical images on a nearby display. The hangar consumed, in blue-white flames that behaved unlike any conventional fire, spreading in geometric patterns rather than natural spread. The official response was to seal the breach, classify everything connected to Project Threshold, and eliminate all evidence of what happened here. But they couldn't close it completely. The hangar, and everyone inside it during the experiment, became phase-shifted, existing partially in our dimension and partially in several others. Rivera's headache intensified as the fractured memories struggled to surface. "The note said this was my 8th attempt. What did that mean?" "You've been here before, Dasha, multiple times." Novak's expression softened with sympathy. "Each time, you've gotten closer to understanding. Each time, they've captured you and erased your memories before sending you back with a different cover story." "Cobalt Dusk," Rivera whispered. "Your most recent attempt. You managed to retrieve Ghost and make it all the way to the dimensional interface before they extracted you." Novak pulled up Rivera's personnel file, the complete version, not the redacted documents she had seen before. "You were never just a communication specialist. You were part of the Threshold project from the beginning, one of our most promising researchers specializing in quantum signal processing." The file showed images of Rivera in a lab coat, working alongside Novak and other scientists who had supposedly died after the project's failure. In the photographs, she looked exactly as she did now, yet the timestamps indicated they were taken over 20 years ago. "That's impossible. I would have been a child." "In this timeline, yes." Novak manipulated the display, showing personnel files from multiple versions of Rivera with different career paths, different specializations, but always connected to Project Threshold in some capacity. "We didn't just discover parallel dimensions. We discovered that time flows differently across them. When the breach occurred, it didn't just affect space, it affected your temporal placement. The implications were staggering." "Are you saying I'm from a different timeline?" "Several of you are," Novak confirmed. "The Rivera who was part of the original experiment was thrown across multiple timelines. Each version has been drawn back to this location, attempting to understand what happened. The government has been using you, all versions of you, to try to gather information about the breach without risking more personnel." Ghost whined softly, pressing against Rivera's leg. She knelt beside him, finding comfort in his solid presence amid the impossible revelations. "The signal," she said finally. "Who sent it?" "You did," Novak replied. "Or rather, the version of you trapped on the other side of the breach. She's been trying to make contact for years, but the signal only gets through when the dimensional barriers thin temporarily." Novak led her to another monitor, showing sensor readings from the Bizur hangar above. "The footprints you saw disappearing into the wall, that's the dimensional interface. Sometimes solid matter from our reality can pass through, sometimes not. It's inconsistent, unstable. And the word in the signal, survivor? There were 12 people in the hangar when the breach occurred. Project records list all as casualties, but the truth is more complicated. They exist in a state between dimensions, able to perceive our reality, but unable to fully interact with it except during periodic alignment events." The overhead lights flickered, alarms sounding from multiple stations. Ghost barked, staring at the entrance they had used. "They've found us," Novak said, moving quickly to a control panel. "Vex's containment team. They monitor dimensional fluctuations from the breach. Your presence this close to the interface has triggered their sensors. Who's Vex? Quillen Vex, Department of Defense liaison to Project Threshold after the incident. His job is to ensure nothing comes through the breach, and that no one unauthorized learns about it. Rivera checked her weapon. We need to move. Is there another exit? There's an emergency evacuation route, but it leads closer to the breach, not away from it. Novak was gathering data drives and papers, shoving them into a weathered backpack. Our priority should be the stabilization device. If we can get it to the interface during the next alignment, your counterpart might be able to use it to begin closing the breach from their side. The blast door they had entered through began to close automatically, security protocols engaging. Through the narrowing gap, Rivera glimpsed figures in tactical gear moving through the hub beyond, their uniforms bearing no insignia or identification. Ghost growled, positioning himself between the women and the door, the massive barrier sealed with a pneumatic hiss, locking mechanisms engaging. Novak moved to a secondary control panel, entering a complex sequence that caused sections of the laboratory floor to reconfigure. This will slow them down, but Vex knows this facility as well as I do. We have minutes at most. A hidden passage opened in the far wall, revealing a narrow utility corridor bathed in red emergency lighting. Novak led them through, the passage sealing behind them as they progressed deeper into the underground complex. The stabilization device is in a secure vault near the original testing chamber. It was designed as a failsafe in case the experiment went wrong, which it did, spectacularly. Novak moved with surprising agility for her apparent age. The device can temporarily strengthen the quantum barriers between dimensions, potentially allowing controlled passage from one side to the other. The utility corridor ended at a vertical shaft with ladder rungs embedded in the wall. They climbed upward, emerging in what appeared to be a secondary laboratory, smaller than the first, but filled with more specialized equipment. This was my private research space, Novak explained, moving to a reinforced cabinet in the corner. After the incident, I continued working on solutions while officially listed as cooperating with the containment effort. When I realized they intended to exploit the breach rather than close it, I faked my death and went underground. She unlocked the cabinet, revealing a device approximately the size of a small briefcase, constructed from components that looked both cutting-edge and improvised. This is it, the dimensional stabilizer. It generates a field that temporarily strengthens the quantum barriers between realities, creating a stable bridge instead of the current unstable tear. Novak handed it to Rivera. Your counterpart on the other side has been working on a complementary device. If both are activated simultaneously, it might be possible to establish a controlled connection. How would we coordinate something like that across dimensions? Ghost, Novak said simply, gesturing to the dog. He exists partially in multiple dimensions simultaneously. That's why he can see things you can't, why he always finds you regardless of security measures. He was engineered specifically for cross-dimensional awareness. The distant sound of a breach charge echoed through the complex. Vex's team had bypassed the sealed laboratory entrance. We're out of time, Novak said, gathering the last essential items from her workspace. We need to reach Hangar 4. The next dimensional alignment occurs in less than an hour. They exited through another hidden passage, this one leading to a maintenance shaft that ascended steeply toward the surface. Ghost went first, then Rivera, with Novak following behind. The shaft ended at a hatch similar to the one they had used to enter the underground complex. Rivera cracked it open cautiously, surveying the area before emerging. They were inside a small maintenance shed, approximately 100 yards from Hangar 4. The dust storm had abated somewhat, providing greater visibility, but also making them more exposed. Helicopters circled the facility perimeter, searchlights sweeping methodically across the grounds. Armed personnel had established checkpoints at major intersections, their movements displaying clear military discipline despite their unmarked uniforms. Vex is thorough, Novak observed grimly. He's had 20 years to perfect his containment protocols. They moved from building to building, using the partially collapsed structures for cover. Ghost led the way, his enhanced senses detecting patrols before they came into view. The dimensional stabilizer felt heavy in Rivera's pack, its significance growing with each step toward the hangar. As they approached Hangar 4, Rivera experienced the most intense double vision episode yet. For several seconds, she saw the facility as it had been in its prime, fully operational, personnel moving purposefully between buildings, aircraft on the tarmac. Ghost froze beside her, watching the phantoms with alert interest rather than his usual wariness. "The dimensional boundaries are already thinning," Novak whispered. "The alignment is approaching faster than anticipated." A patrol passed between them and the hangar, two operatives in tactical gear conducting a methodical sweep of the area. Rivera signaled for stillness, waiting until they moved beyond effective visual range before proceeding. The hangar's service entrance remained their best option, but it was now under direct observation from a sniper positioned on an adjacent building. Novak pointed to a partially collapsed section of the hangar's outer wall, damage that appeared genuine, unlike the staged collapse of the roof. "That section intersects with the dimensional interface at multiple points," she explained. "It's unstable, but it might allow passage if we time it correctly." They circled wide to approach from the blind side of the sniper's position. The wall section Novak had indicated looked solid from a distance, but up close, Rivera could see subtle distortions, areas where the metal seemed to ripple slightly, as if viewed through heat waves. Ghost approached first, sniffing cautiously at the distorted section. The dog stepped forward, his front paws disappearing into what appeared to be solid material. He looked back at Rivera, waiting for her command. "Good boy," she whispered, following him toward the anomaly. The sensation was disorienting, resistance followed by a sudden lack of it, like pushing through a membrane that initially resists, then gives way. For a moment, Rivera experienced complete sensory confusion, overlapping visual inputs, sounds from multiple sources, conflicting tactile sensations. Then they were through, standing inside the hangar. But not the hangar she had explored earlier. This version of Hangar 4 was fully operational, brightly lit, and filled with advanced equipment. Personnel in lab coats moved purposefully between workstations, though their forms flickered occasionally, becoming transparent before solidifying again. None seemed aware of the new arrivals. "They can't perceive us fully," Novak explained, her voice hushed despite her statement. "We're phase-shifted relative to their dimensional state, but this won't last. The alignment is still building toward its peak." They moved through the active laboratory, passing through workstations and equipment as if they were ghosts. The central area held a familiar circular platform, larger and more elaborate than the one Rivera had seen in Novak's underground lab, but clearly the same technology. "The original threshold device," Novak confirmed. "This is the hangar as it exists in the primary alternate dimension, the one where the experiment continued rather than failing catastrophically." Ghost stopped suddenly, attention fixed on a figure working alone at a station near the dimensional platform. The woman wore a lab coat with Dr. D. Rivera embroidered on the pocket. Her face was Rivera's own, though with subtle differences, a scar across her right cheekbone, hair cut shorter, expression more severe. "She can't see us yet," Novak whispered, "but she knows we're coming. She's been waiting." The other Rivera looked up suddenly, her eyes scanning the area where they stood. For a brief moment, her gaze seemed to lock with Rivera's own. Then the hangar flickered, the bright laboratory overlaid with the abandoned, dust-filled space Rivera had first encountered. "The dimensions are aligning," Novak said urgently. "We need to reach the interface point before Vex's team breaks through." As if summoned by her words, the hangar's main doors burst inward, a tactical team in full gear pouring through the opening. Their forms flickered between dimensions, sometimes solid, sometimes ghost-like, but their weapons remained consistently tangible. At their center walked a tall, lean man with close-cropped gray hair and a face bearing a distinctive burn scar from temple to jaw. He carried no visible weapon, his bearing radiating confident authority. "Dr. Novak," he called, voice carrying easily across the hangar. "This is becoming tiresome. How many times must we repeat this scenario?" Novak pushed Rivera toward the central platform. "Get to the interface. Ghost knows where. I'll distract them." "Quillen," Novak called back, stepping away from Rivera. "You know this can't continue. The breach is expanding. Your containment strategy is failing." Vex signaled his team to spread out, their movements precise and coordinated. "The breach is stable under my protocols. Your interference is what causes these fluctuations." Ghost tugged at Rivera's sleeve, pulling her toward the wall where she had seen the footprints disappear. The interface point. She followed, keeping low and using the shifting dimensional states to move through solid objects when possible. Behind her, Novak continued engaging Vex. "You're not containing anything. You're exploiting the breach for intelligence gathering across timelines. The ethical violations alone. Ethics? Vex's laugh was sharp. We're talking about national security across multiple dimensional states. Your counterparts in several timelines have already weaponized the technology. Would you have us remain defenseless? Rivera reached the interface point, Ghost pressing close beside her. The wall before her flickered between solid and transparent, offering glimpses of another version of the hangar. Darker, more industrial, filled with different equipment. She removed the dimensional stabilizer from her pack, searching for activation controls. The device was unlike any technology she had handled before, its interface a combination of conventional switches and components that seemed to shift position when viewed directly. Ghost whined softly, pressing his nose against a specific panel on the device. Following his guidance, Rivera found an activation sequence labeled in Novak's precise handwriting. As she began the startup procedure, the device emitted a low hum that seemed to resonate with the flickering interface before her. The dimensional barrier rippled more visibly, the overlapping realities separating into distinct layers that she could perceive individually. In one, Vex's team was converging on her position. In another, scientific equipment stood abandoned, covered in dust. In a third, her counterpart looked up sharply, as if hearing the stabilizer's activation. The other Rivera moved purposefully toward the interface point from her side, carrying a device that mirrored the stabilizer. Ghost barked once, the sound seeming to exist in all dimensions simultaneously. The alternate Rivera froze, her eyes widening as she finally perceived her counterpart clearly. "You made it through," she said, her voice distorted but understandable. "After so many attempts." "How do we proceed?" Rivera asked, aware of Vex's team closing in behind her. "Synchronize the stabilizers on my mark," her counterpart instructed, positioning her device against the interface. "The resonance field should create a stable passage point for approximately 90 seconds. Rivera placed her stabilizer against the wall, where it hovered slightly above the surface, held in place by some unseen force. Behind her, she heard Novak cry out as Vex's team reached her position. 3, 2, 1, mark, the alternate Rivera counted down. Both women activated their devices simultaneously. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The dimensional barrier between them solidified into a visible membrane, silvery and translucent, rippling with energy patterns that resembled neural networks. "Step through quickly," her counterpart urged. "The field won't hold long against Vex's countermeasures." Rivera looked back. Novak was being restrained by two operatives while Vex approached the interface, pulling a device from his pocket that likely served to disrupt the stabilizers. "Come with me," Rivera said to Novak. The scientist shook her head. "One of us needs to remain to ensure the interface closes properly after you cross. Otherwise, the breach could expand catastrophically." Ghost pressed against Rivera's leg, staring at the shimmering barrier with intense focus. The dog seemed to understand what was happening, his posture communicating readiness. "He goes with you," Novak called. "He was always meant to." Rivera placed her hand against the stabilized interface. Instead of passing through, her fingers met resistance, not solid, but structured, like pressing against a magnetic field. With more pressure, her hand began to penetrate the barrier, the sensation unlike anything she had experienced before. A gunshot echoed through the hangar. Novak had broken free momentarily, using the distraction to disable one of Vex's disruptor devices. She fell immediately after, tackled by multiple operatives. "Now or never, Dasha," her counterpart urged from the other side. Rivera stepped forward, pushing against the resistance of the dimensional barrier. Ghost moved with her, their progress slow but steady. Behind them, Vex shouted commands to his team, their weapons training on the interface point. The barrier stretched around them, enveloping rather than simply parting. For a moment, Rivera existed in both dimensions simultaneously, seeing both versions of the hangar, both versions of herself, both realities competing for dominance in her perception. Then her counterpart reached through from the other side, grasping her arm with surprising strength. Their hands touched, and a shock of recognition passed between them. Not just physical similarity, but a profound sense of connection, of completeness. "I've been trying to reach you for so long," the other Rivera said, pulling her forward. As they stood face to face across the thinning dimensional barrier, her counterpart pressed something into her hand, a small data drive. This contains everything you need to know about Project Threshold, about what really happened here, about what they're planning. Ghost barked sharply, breaking the moment. Vex had reached the interface, his disruptor device activated and aimed at the stabilizers. "You shouldn't have come here, Chief," Vex said, his voice somehow reaching across dimensions. "But since you did, perhaps you'd be more valuable on that side. For now." He fired the disruptor, not at Rivera, but at the stabilizer on his side of the barrier. The device sparked and shuddered, its harmonics faltering. The interface between dimensions began to destabilize, the silvery membrane rippling violently. Rivera's counterpart shoved her backward, away from the collapsing passage. "Get to the secure lab. Find Novak's notes. We'll try again during the next alignment." The barrier collapsed with a silent flash of energy that threw Rivera backward. Ghost yelped as he was similarly repelled, landing beside her on a cold concrete floor. When her vision cleared, they were alone in a version of Hangar 4 that resembled neither the abandoned facility she had first encountered nor the active laboratory she had glimpsed through the interface. This space was industrial, utilitarian, filled with equipment that looked more military than scientific. Ghost recovered quickly, shaking himself before moving to her side. Rivera checked the data drive her counterpart had given her, confirming it was intact before securing it in her vest pocket. They needed to find this timeline's version of Novak's secure lab, assuming it existed here. As Rivera oriented herself, trying to identify familiar reference points in the unfamiliar space, a bank of monitors on the far wall activated automatically. The screens displayed multiple views of the hangar she had just left, showing Vex's team securing the area. One monitor shifted to show a satellite view of Alameda Naval Air Station, but in this image, Hangar 4 was completely absent, the space where it should have stood appearing as empty tarmac. A final monitor displayed a simple message: "Dimensional transit successful. Subject, Rivera, D. Timeline designation, Theta, 3. Current location, Sigma 7. Classification, status, classified." Rivera stared at the monitors, the full implications of her situation beginning to sink in. She wasn't just in another part of the facility. She was in another reality entirely. Ghost pressed against her leg, his presence the only familiar constant in this new dimensional state. From a speaker somewhere in the hangar, a voice addressed her directly. A voice she recognized as Novak's, though different, harder. "Welcome to Sigma 7, Dasha. The secure lab is sub-level 3, Section H. We've been expecting you for quite some time. Have you ever felt like you glimpsed an alternate version of your life? One where different choices led to completely different outcomes? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to find out what Rivera discovers in this new reality in the final part of Phantom Signal. Rivera moved cautiously through the unfamiliar version of Hangar 4, Ghost staying close to her side. This iteration of the facility bore military precision in its layout. Workstations arranged in concentric circles around a central platform, similar to the one she had seen in the other dimension, but more refined, as if the technology had evolved over years of development rather than being abandoned. "Sub-level 3, Section H," she repeated to herself, searching for access points to the lower levels. The hangar's perimeter featured multiple sealed doorways with biometric scanners beside each one. Ghost trotted ahead, stopping at a particular door that appeared identical to the others. The scanner beside it activated as they approached, a soft blue light illuminating the panel. "Biometric identification required," an automated voice announced. Rivera hesitated only briefly before placing her palm against the scanner. This version of Alameda clearly expected her, or some version of her. The scanner hummed, the blue light shifting to green. "Identity confirmed, Rivera. D. Temporal variance detected. Clearance granted with monitoring protocols activated." The heavy door slid open, revealing a sterile corridor with recessed lighting. Ghost entered first, his behavior suggesting familiarity with the environment, despite its difference from anything in their home dimension. They descended through the complex via a series of secure elevators and checkpoints, each one recognizing Rivera's biometric signature, while noting her temporal variance. No personnel appeared to challenge or assist them, the facility seemingly operating under automated protocols. Sub-level 3 opened into a vast underground complex far larger than the tunnels she had navigated in her own timeline. Section markers on the walls guided them toward Area H, which appeared to be isolated from the main laboratory spaces by additional security measures. The entrance to Section H featured a more comprehensive security scan. Retinal, voice, and palm authentication required simultaneously. State your research designation, the system prompted. Rivera had no idea what response the system expected. Before she could attempt to bypass the security, Ghost barked once, the sound echoing in the empty corridor. The system responded immediately. Sentinel authentication recognized. Emergency access protocol initiated. The security barrier deactivated, granting them entry to a space unlike anything Rivera had seen in either dimension. Section H resembled a hybrid between a scientific research laboratory and a military command center. Workstations surrounded a central holographic projection system, currently displaying a complex multicolored web that she recognized as a map of dimensional intersections. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't make it," said a familiar voice. Astrid Novak emerged from a side office, though this version of the scientist differed significantly from the one Rivera had just left behind. This Novak appeared younger, more severe, with military bearing evident in her posture and the uniform she wore, a naval officer's uniform with insignia Rivera didn't recognize. "You're not the Novak I know," Rivera stated, maintaining distance while assessing potential threats. "No more than you're the Rivera I know," Novak replied calmly. Dimensional transit tends to complicate relationships. Ghost showed no apprehension toward this version of Novak, which Rivera found reassuring. The dog's instincts regarding dimensional variance had proven reliable so far. "Your counterpart said you'd have information for me, about Project Threshold, about what really happened." Rivera removed the data drive from her vest pocket. "She gave me this." Novak nodded, gesturing toward a secure terminal. That contains her perspective on events, but in this timeline, Project Threshold took a different path after the initial breach. Here, we didn't try to seal the dimensional tear, we stabilized and expanded it. The holographic display shifted to show the history of Project Threshold in this timeline. Successful experiments, controlled dimensional transfers, systematic exploration of parallel realities. The project had grown from a speculative research initiative into a major strategic asset. "In your timeline, the breach was treated as a disaster to be contained," Novak explained. "Here, it was recognized as the most significant scientific breakthrough in human history. We've established stable connections with 17 dimensional variants, with varying degrees of information exchange." Rivera struggled to process the implications. "And the people trapped during the original experiment? The survivors?" "That's where timelines diverge most dramatically," Novak replied, her expression darkening. "In your reality, they remain caught between dimensions, unable to fully exist in any single state. Here, we develop the technology to extract them, at a cost." She brought up personnel files showing the 12 researchers involved in the original experiment. Each file included post-extraction medical data indicating severe neurological complications, psychological instability, and significantly shortened life expectancy. "We saved them physically, but the dimensional exposure permanently altered them. Most died within 5 years of extraction. A few adapted, evolved perhaps, developing capabilities we still don't fully understand." One file remained open on the display. Dr. Dasha Rivera, Quantum Communications Specialist. The photograph showed Rivera as she appeared now, but the birth date indicated she would have been in her late 50s, not the 38 years she currently was. "In the original timeline, what we call Prime, you were part of the research team," Novak explained. "When the breach occurred, you were fractured across multiple dimensional states. Different versions of you exist in various timelines, all connected to Project Threshold in some capacity, all experiencing temporal displacement relative to Prime." Rivera examined the file, finding details of a life she had never lived yet that felt hauntingly familiar. The headaches, the memory issues, that's from dimensional fracturing. "Temporal displacement syndrome," Novak confirmed. "Your consciousness trying to reconcile conflicting timelines. The Rivera in your dimension was inserted artificially, a constructed identity with implanted memories designed to create a stable personality matrix capable of functioning in that reality." Ghost pressed against Rivera's leg, offering silent support as she absorbed these revelations. And him? What is he in all this? Project Sentinel, Novak said, observing the dog with evident respect. Genetically engineered to perceive and navigate dimensional boundaries. His consciousness exists simultaneously across multiple realities, anchored by a primary physical form in each. She brought up another file showing Ghost's development, the specialized breeding program, genetic modifications, neural enhancements that allowed cross-dimensional awareness. He was paired with you because you share a similar quantum signature from the original fracturing event. He can track you across dimensions, which is why he always finds you regardless of security measures. Rivera knelt beside Ghost, studying the familiar face that now represented something far more extraordinary than a military working dog. His silver-gray coat, unusual even for his breed, apparently contained specialized cells that facilitated dimensional perception. "Why am I here? Why now?" she asked finally, standing to face Novak. "Because the dimensional breach in your timeline is destabilizing," Novak replied gravely. "What your Vex believes he's containing is actually expanding. The periodic alignments are becoming more frequent, the boundaries between realities thinning. If it continues, the dimensional walls will collapse entirely." She activated a simulation showing cascading dimensional failures spreading from a central point, Alameda Naval Air Station. "We've observed this process in other dimensional variants. Once collapse begins, it's nearly impossible to stop. Entire realities fold into each other, creating temporal and physical paradoxes that destroy both. And you brought me here to prevent that?" "Your counterpart did," Novak corrected. "She's been monitoring your timeline specifically because it represents the earliest stage of breach destabilization we've been able to identify. If containment protocols can be modified there, we might develop a solution applicable to other affected timelines." Rivera processed this information while examining the laboratory around them. Unlike the improvised equipment in her timeline, everything here appeared refined, purpose-built for dimensional research. "What about Vex? In my timeline, he's actively preventing any attempts to modify the containment approach. Quillen Vex exists in multiple timelines, always in a security or containment role related to the breach," Novak explained. "In some, he's merely misguided. In others, including yours, we believe he's deliberately allowing controlled destabilization to facilitate military applications of dimensional technology." The holographic display shifted again, showing tactical applications of breach technology, weapons capable of affecting targets across dimensional boundaries, surveillance systems that could observe other timelines without detection, even theoretical deployment of forces into alternate realities. "The strategic advantages are obvious," Novak continued. "Imagine conducting operations in a timeline where your target has no concept of dimensional transit, no defenses against cross-reality threats." "That's insane," Rivera said. "The risks far outweigh any tactical advantage. A perspective shared by most versions of you across the dimensional spectrum," Novak noted with apparent approval. "Which is why your counterpart has been working to bring you here. She believes you can return to your timeline with the knowledge and technology needed to properly contain the breach before Vex's approaches cause irreversible damage." Ghost's ears perked suddenly, his attention drawn to the holographic display, where the dimensional map showed a rapidly forming concentration of energy. "Another alignment event," Novak observed, moving quickly to a control station. "Earlier than predicted, the destabilization is accelerating." Alarms sounded throughout the facility as the dimensional sensors registered increasing fluctuations. The holographic map displayed multiple realities converging on a single point, Hangar 4, the original breach location. "We need to move quickly," Novak said, gathering equipment from various workstations. "This alignment might be our best opportunity to send you back with the stabilization technology." She handed Rivera a device similar to the dimensional stabilizer she had used earlier, but more refined, its components firmly integrated rather than improvised. "This is the Mark 7 stabilizer, designed specifically for permanent breach containment rather than transit facilitation. If properly deployed at the primary interface point during peak alignment, it should re-establish dimensional boundaries according to their original configuration." Rivera examined the device, noting the simplified control interface. "How do I activate it?" "The system is semi-autonomous, designed to synchronize with the quantum signature of the breach itself," Novak explained, loading additional equipment into a tactical pack. Ghost will guide you to the optimal deployment location. His Sentinel programming includes recognition of dimensional pressure patterns invisible to human perception. The alarms intensified as they prepared to return to the hangar level. Novak provided Rivera with dimensional sensing equipment, a specialized headset that would allow her to perceive dimensional boundaries as visual overlays. One critical detail, Novak said as they entered the elevator. Deployment of the Mark 7 will permanently seal the breach from your side. No further transit will be possible between your timeline and any other dimensional variant. You'll be effectively isolated. Rivera considered the implications as they ascended toward the hangar. What about the other versions of me, the one who brought me here? Each timeline will be independently sealed, Novak replied. The Rivera who helped you, your direct counterpart, will remain in her dimensional state, unable to reach yours again. The connection between fractured aspects of your consciousness will be severed. Ghost pressed closer to Rivera, sensing her unease at this revelation. Will that affect him? His ability to exist across dimensions? Sentinel units were designed with dimensional isolation protocols as a contingency. Once the breach is sealed, Ghost consciousness will fully consolidate into his physical form in your timeline. He'll lose his cross-dimensional awareness, but retain all other enhanced capabilities. The elevator reached the hangar level, opening to reveal dramatically changed conditions. The previously empty space now bustled with personnel in specialized containment gear, all focused on the central platform where dimensional monitoring equipment registered the growing alignment event. At the center of the platform stood a figure Rivera recognized immediately, her counterpart from the previous dimensional transfer, now wearing a specialized suit covered in sensors and data interfaces. "You made it," the other Rivera said, genuine relief in her voice. "The alignment is happening faster than we predicted. All dimensional variants are converging simultaneously." The hangar walls seemed to ripple with energy, overlapping realities becoming briefly visible as transparent overlays. Through these momentary windows, Rivera glimpsed other versions of the facility, some abandoned, some active with different configurations of equipment, some completely transformed into unrecognizable structures. "The Mark 7 is ready," Novak informed the other Rivera. "Full containment protocol, calibrated for her temporal signature." Her counterpart nodded, turning to Rivera with intense focus. "What you're about to attempt has never been successfully executed in any timeline we've observed. The Mark 7 should create a cascading quantum barrier that reestablishes proper dimensional separation." "Should?" Rivera questioned, noting the uncertainty. "Theoretical models show 97% probability of successful containment," the other Rivera replied. "The alternative is continued deterioration, leading to complete dimensional collapse." Ghost growled suddenly, staring at a section of the hangar wall where the dimensional ripples were intensifying. Through the thinning barrier, Rivera could see figures in tactical gear moving into position. Vex's team, but from her original timeline. "They're tracking the alignment," Novak observed, preparing to secure the breach point from their side. "Vex can't be allowed to interfere with deployment," the other Rivera warned. "Once you return, you'll have approximately 3 minutes to reach the primary interface and activate the Mark 7 before the alignment peaks. If Vex prevents deployment during that window, containment will fail." Rivera checked her equipment one final time, as the dimensional sensors showed rapidly increasing convergence. "How do I get past Vex's team?" "You won't be alone," her counterpart assured her, nodding toward Ghost. "And we've prepared a distraction to draw Vex's attention during the critical deployment phase." The central platform began emitting a high-pitched whine as energy built toward the transfer point. Technicians cleared the area, establishing a perimeter of monitoring equipment around the dimensional interface that was forming at the center of the platform. "One last thing," the other Rivera said, grasping her arm firmly. "After containment, you'll experience memory consolidation. Fragments from other timelines will surface temporarily before your consciousness fully stabilizes. Don't fight it. Those memories contain crucial information." Ghost positioned himself at Rivera's side, body tense with readiness. The dog seemed to understand exactly what was happening and what would be required of him. "It's time," Novak announced as the dimensional sensors reached critical readings. "Interface stabilizing for transfer." A shimmering portal formed at the center of the platform. Similar to the barrier Rivera had crossed earlier, but more defined, its edges precisely controlled by the surrounding equipment. Through it, She could see the abandoned version of Hangar 4 from her timeline, now filled with Vex's tactical team, preparing containment measures of their own. "Remember," her counterpart said as they approached the interface, "3 minutes to reach the primary breach point. Ghost will guide you. Don't let Vex distract you from deployment." Rivera nodded, securing the Mark 7 stabilizer in her tactical pack. "What happens to you? After all the breaches are contained?" Her counterpart smiled slightly. "I'll continue working on dimensional theory from this side. Perhaps someday we'll develop safe methods of communication across sealed boundaries. Until then, know that in at least 17 realities, versions of you are working toward the same goal." Ghost barked once, sensing the portal reaching optimal stability for transit. The interface between dimensions pulsed with energy, the boundary between realities momentarily perfect for controlled passage. "Now," Novak ordered, activating the final transfer sequence. Rivera stepped forward with Ghost, the dimensional barrier parting around them more smoothly than during their previous transit. For a brief moment, she existed in multiple states simultaneously, aware of all versions of herself across the dimensional spectrum. Then reality snapped back into singular focus as they emerged into the abandoned hangar of her original timeline. Immediately, alarms sounded from Vex's equipment, his team turning toward the unexpected arrival. "Breach detection at primary interface," one of the technicians announced. "Subject has returned with unknown device." Vex himself stood at a control station near the wall, where Rivera had previously seen footprints disappear into solid metal. He looked unsurprised by her return, almost as if he had been expecting it. "Chief Rivera," he called, his voice carrying across the hangar, "I see you've been upgraded during your interdimensional vacation." Rivera ignored him, moving purposefully toward the primary breach point, with Ghost leading the way. The dog moved with absolute certainty, navigating between equipment and personnel as if they weren't there. "Secure the subject," Vex ordered, his team moving to intercept. Before they could reach her, the hangar lights flickered, power fluctuating throughout the facility. The dimensional sensors Vex's team had deployed began registering multiple anomalies appearing simultaneously throughout the structure. "Sir, we have breach events forming at all secondary interfaces," a technician reported urgently. Dimensional pressure increasing beyond containment parameters. It was the distraction her counterpart had promised. As Vex's attention diverted to the multiple breach events threatening his containment protocols, Rivera pressed forward toward the primary interface point. Ghost reached it first, stopping at a section of wall that appeared completely ordinary. Without the dimensional sensing equipment from the other timeline, Rivera had to trust the dog's perception of the optimal deployment location. She removed the Mark 7 stabilizer from her pack, searching for activation controls as Vex noticed their position. "Stop her," he commanded, abandoning the secondary alerts to focus on the real threat. "The device is a destabilizer, not a containment system." Two operatives broke away from the containment efforts, moving to intercept Rivera before she could activate the Mark 7. Ghost positioned himself between them, hackles raised, a growl emanating from deep in his chest. The dimensional pressure continued building, the walls of the hangar seeming to flex and distort as multiple realities pressed against the thinning boundaries. Through momentary windows, Rivera glimpsed other versions of the facility, including the military research complex she had just left. She found the activation sequence, the controls responding to her touch as the stabilizer hummed to life. Ghost barked once, confirming the position as optimal for deployment. "Rivera, you don't understand what you're doing," Vex called, approaching cautiously as his operatives were held at bay by Ghost. "That device will seal all dimensional access permanently. Years of research, of strategic advantage, lost." "That's exactly what I understand," Rivera replied, continuing the activation sequence. The stabilizer projected a targeting grid onto the wall, identifying the precise center of the dimensional breach beneath the seemingly solid surface. Vex drew a weapon, not standard military issue, but something more advanced, with components that seemed to shift and reconfigure as he aimed. "That device doesn't belong in this timeline. Surrendering it is the only way you return to duty without facing treason charges." Rivera ignored the threat, completing the final activation sequence as Ghost maintained his protective position. The Mark 7 stabilizer locked onto the breach coordinates, extending mechanical anchors that secured it to the wall surface. "Deployment site secured," Rivera confirmed, more to herself than anyone else. "Initiating containment protocol." Vex fired his weapon, the energy pulse striking near Rivera's position, but failing to disrupt the stabilizer's activation. The device was now operating autonomously, its systems interfacing directly with the dimensional breach. "You're making a mistake," Vex insisted, genuine desperation entering his voice. "The strategic applications of controlled dimensional access outweigh the theoretical risks. We can manage the destabilization." "No, you can't," Rivera countered, standing her ground as the stabilizer began its work. "I've seen what happens when the breach expands beyond containment. There won't be any strategic advantage when reality itself collapses." The Mark VII emitted a pulsing energy field that spread across the wall surface, revealing the true extent of the dimensional breach, a fracture in reality extending throughout the hangar structure. The field began sealing these fractures systematically, working outward from the primary interface point. Vex's team scrambled to counter the containment process, deploying their own equipment in a desperate attempt to maintain dimensional access. But the Mark VII operated on principles beyond their technology, its containment protocols overriding their interference attempts. "You don't have the authority to make this decision," Vex argued, his calm facade cracking as his life's work faced elimination. "This is a matter of national security across multiple dimensional states, which is exactly why the breach needs to be contained," Rivera replied. "Some technologies are too dangerous regardless of their potential applications." The containment field continued expanding, the dimensional fractures sealing visibly as the stabilizer's energy pulsed through the structure. Ghost remained vigilant, his enhanced senses tracking the progress of the containment process beyond human perception. As the field reached critical coverage, the hangar began transforming, not into another dimensional variant, but into its true state in this reality. The stage collapse disappeared, revealing a facility that had indeed suffered fire damage, but not to the extent portrayed in the cover story. The experimental equipment remained, but dormant, powerless without dimensional energy to sustain it. Vex watched in silent defeat as his containment team's equipment failed, the dimensional sensors going dark as the breaches sealed completely. The Mark VII completed its primary function, the energy field contracting back into the device as it entered final containment mode. "What have you done?" Vex whispered, the question rhetorical as the evidence surrounded them. "Prevented a dimensional collapse that would have destroyed multiple realities," Rivera answered anyway, "including this one." The stabilizer detached from the wall, its purpose fulfilled, the breach permanently sealed. As Rivera retrieved the device, she felt a wave of disorientation, the beginning of the memory consolidation her counterpart had warned about. Fragmented images flooded her consciousness, herself in a lab coat, working on the original Project Threshold. The moment of the breach occurring, versions of herself across multiple timelines. Knowledge and experiences she had never lived yet that felt intimately familiar. Ghost pressed against her leg, grounding her as the memories integrated. The dog's consciousness was similarly consolidating, his cross-dimensional awareness focusing entirely into his physical form in this reality. Vex's operatives stood down, their mission parameters invalidated by the breach containment. Several removed their tactical gear, revealing standard military uniforms beneath, personnel following orders without understanding the full implications. "There will be consequences," Vex stated, his tone lacking conviction. "Interdimensional transit, unauthorized deployment of experimental technology, interference with classified operations." "Document it however you want," Rivera replied, her voice steady despite the continuing memory consolidation. "But understand this, Project Threshold is over. The dimensional breach is contained. Any attempt to recreate it will face opposition from forces beyond your security clearance." She didn't fully understand the words as they left her mouth, but knew them to be true, knowledge from her other selves informing her response. Somewhere in her consolidating memories was information about safeguards implemented across multiple timelines to prevent future breaches. Vex seemed to recognize the shift in her awareness, the authority suddenly evident in her bearing. Without further argument, he instructed his team to secure the facility for conventional decommissioning. The threat of consequences remained unspoken, but understood. This confrontation would continue through official channels. Rivera and Ghost departed the hangar unimpeded, the dimensional stabilizer secure in her pack. The facility around them appeared different now, truly abandoned rather than carefully staged, the cover story becoming reality as the dimensional anomalies disappeared. Outside, the dust had settled. Visibility returned to normal across the former naval base. Military helicopters circled overhead, no longer searching but monitoring, assessing the changed situation. In the days that followed, Rivera experienced the full process of memory consolidation. Fragments from multiple timelines integrating into a coherent whole that expanded her understanding while maintaining her core identity. The headaches and dissociative episodes faded as her consciousness stabilized. Command debriefed her extensively, Lockhart present but largely silent as she explained the dimensional breach, Project Threshold, and the containment operation. Her story was corroborated by data from the Mark Thasfin stabilizer and evidence recovered from the sealed facility. "You understand, we can never acknowledge any of this officially," Lockhart said when the debriefing concluded. "Dimensional transit, parallel realities, the public implications alone would be destabilizing." "I'm not asking for acknowledgement," Rivera replied. "Just assurance that no further attempts will be made to recreate the breach technology." "That decision is beyond my authority," Lockhart admitted. "But I've included your warning in my official report, along with the recorded dimensional collapse simulations. The risks appear to significantly outweigh potential applications." Ghost remained with Rivera throughout the process, his enhanced capabilities undiminished despite the loss of his cross-dimensional awareness. The dog's sentinel programming had consolidated successfully, making him uniquely valuable even in a single-dimensional state. 3 months after the containment operation, Project Threshold was officially dismantled. Dr. Astrid Novak was reinstated to oversee the process, having emerged from hiding following the breach containment. Her expertise ensured that all technology was properly neutralized or repurposed for conventional applications. The personnel trapped in the dimensional breach were officially listed as casualties of the original experiment, honored in a classified memorial service attended by family members granted temporary security clearance. Rivera recognized faces from her consolidated memories, colleagues and friends from a life she had experienced only through dimensional fragments. Vex was reassigned to conventional counterintelligence operations, his specialized knowledge of dimensional technology rendered largely theoretical by the permanent sealing of the breach. His career continued under close monitoring from authorities informed about the true nature of Project Threshold. Rivera herself returned to active duty, her security clearance restored and expanded to reflect her unique experience. The memory consolidation had left her with knowledge beyond conventional training: quantum physics, dimensional theory, specialized communications protocols, making her invaluable for evaluating potential breakthrough technologies. On the anniversary of the containment operation, Lockhart accompanied Rivera and Ghost to the now truly decommissioned Alameda Naval Air Station. The facility had been secured with conventional methods, Hangar 4 filled with concrete to prevent any future attempts to access the former breach location. They stood at the perimeter, observing workers completing the final stages of the decommissioning process. Massive concrete mixers poured their contents into the hangar foundation, permanently sealing whatever remnants of Project Threshold might have remained. "Do you ever wonder about them?" Lockhart asked quietly. "The other versions of yourself in different timelines?" Rivera considered the question, absent-mindedly stroking Ghost's head as the dog sat attentively beside her. "Sometimes. The memories are integrated now, but distinct, experiences that shaped other versions of me under different circumstances." "Do you think they succeeded in containing their breaches?" "Yes," Rivera replied, with certainty she couldn't fully explain. The containment cascade was designed to propagate across all connected dimensional variants. If it worked here, it worked everywhere. Ghost's ears perked suddenly, his attention fixing on the sealed hangar. Rivera followed his gaze but saw nothing unusual, just workers completing their tasks, the facility being properly decommissioned at last. Lockhart's radio crackled unexpectedly, static breaking through before resolving into a clear voice. "The mission is complete, Commander." Rivera recognized her own voice in the transmission, though she hadn't spoken. Lockhart looked at her questioningly, but she shook her head, equally confused. Ghost wagged his tail, watching something move across the sealed hangar that only he could perceive. Perhaps some echo of dimensional awareness remained, allowing him to sense things beyond conventional perception. As they prepared to leave, Lockhart placed something on the concrete. Barrier, Rivera's Navy Cross, awarded posthumously to the original researcher who had died in the fire 20 years earlier. A symbolic gesture acknowledging the truth hidden beneath layers of classification and cover stories. When they turned to walk away, Rivera glanced back and momentarily thought she saw the metal shift position, as if picked up by invisible hands. Then it settled back into place, the moment passing so quickly she couldn't be certain it had happened at all. Ghost looked up at her knowingly, his intelligent eyes communicating understanding beyond words. Some connections transcended dimensional boundaries, persisting even after the physical links were severed. The dog had been engineered to bridge realities, and perhaps something of that ability remained, despite the breach containment. As they departed Alameda for the final time, Rivera felt a sense of completion that extended beyond her individual experience, a resonance with other versions of herself across sealed timelines, all having completed their missions in their own ways. The truth of Project Threshold would remain classified, the reality of dimensional breaches known only to those directly involved. But something fundamental had been preserved, the integrity of reality itself, maintained by choices made across multiple dimensions, by versions of the same people facing the same essential question, whether knowledge should be pursued regardless of consequence. Ghost pressed against her leg as they walked, his presence a constant reminder of connections that defied conventional understanding. Some bonds transcended dimensional boundaries, existing in the spaces between what could be measured and what could only be felt. Has a loyal companion ever sensed something you couldn't see? Have you ever felt an inexplicable connection to a path not taken? Share your story in the comments and subscribe to explore more tales of hidden truths waiting just beyond perception.